Good day and welcome back. We are now going to start with our final session, and I'm going to welcome Gustav. Gustav has over 15 years of experience across multiple sectors. He offers practical expertise in veld rehabilitation, invasive plant control, and sustainable land use planning.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm just going to discuss a bit on the decision um, making framework for AIS. Obviously, like Dr. Harding and the professor on the forest management said, monitoring is key, and we need as Malcolm's also said, we need an integrated approach to make sure we address both the bush encroachers and the alien invasive plant species. Um, so, as Malcolm and various speakers, I won't go too much detail because they've already said much of this. We definitely need an integrated approach using the benefits and recognizing the disadvantages and risks of various methods. So the methods being mechanical, chemical, cultural, and biological. So these combined to, is called integrated control. The integrated control method is highly flexible and it's based on the principle of adaptive management. Sometimes we don't have all the information, especially when starting in a new area. So the principle of adaptive management, where you learn from um, trial sites and then adjust your management accordingly to get the most effective economically, ecologically, and method, both animals, um, humans, and the landowner in general to achieve these goals of um, correcting this balance. I think what Malcolm highlighted, we need to get the right balance. Not all detrospeckers is bad. We just need to get it through self-thinning to a manageable level. So and having the right structure, as Malcolm also alluded to in his presentation. So one of the a lot of people they want total eradication, but to be honest, I don't think that's possible in the short run, at least. So to get to I think Dr. Harding also referred to that yesterday. To get to manageable units, um, and as Malcolm alluded um, to first tackle the light density areas. But I'll go through that a little bit later. How do we decide where do you prioritize and risk rank levels of invasion to new areas and yeah. So the principle of the land use is also dynamic and flexible, and it require. I think what a lot of people have alluded to, and one of the um, discussions yesterday is to address both the root causes. Why are these alien invasives and indigenous invaders taking over? So, in the case of indigenous invaders, we don't have to get rid of them totally. We just need to restore that balance both in species composition and in structure, as I think Malcolm highlighted in his presentation. And then the symptoms. So the integrated control mainly addresses the symptoms of the problem, whereas felt management, water management, correct stormwater management, having the right species of game. Some areas we have way too many elephants, as an example. I know that's also a hot topic. Um, yeah, so I've just highlighted those. Um, and then I think what Malcolm and Dr. Harding and various other speakers have highlighted is it's not a once-off thing. It's a long-term uh, that comprises various phases. So the initial starting off with the initial control, and that's just the first step. And then having follow-up control, and that usually begins in year two, and it gradually the cost declines with time as you go longer in your control program. And then I think what the forest expert, I forgot, apologies, the person's name from yesterday highlighted is monitoring is also critical. And what do we monitor? Not so I'll go in a little bit more detail into that. And then having the maintenance control once you've reduced your follow-up control, which is usually one person can cover a large area once you get to the maintenance phase of your AIS. And then what I think Dr. Harding also and Malcolm highlighted is if you're not going to implement all of these failures, addressing both the root causes and the symptoms, it's actually better not to do anything at all. So rather plan according to your budget, as I think, and the management plan, as Dr. Harding highlighted yesterday. Um, yeah, so that we make sure we include all the various phases of our AIS and bush encroachment. And it's a long term, unfortunately, it's a long term, there's no silver bullet, has been mentioned. It's often a danger that people forget how it originally, once they see the visual improvement and then they pull out too early, and that can create problems with the reinfestation actually being at a higher density than pre-disturbance, if you'd like to call it like that. And um, we must, the second danger that we must try and avoid is make sure we've got the correct planning. We update our plans like it's a live document. Like we said, we just use this principle of adaptive management and make sure our plans are continuously updated and improving. So the land unit approach, as we discussed, we're trying to get these AIS and indigenous invaders to manageable levels. Also trying to prevent reinfestation, and we want to make ecosystem that is sustainable in the long term, focusing on ecosystem resilience and on functionality. So, what are some of the tools that we can use for this? How do we decide in a big game reserve? Where do we start? And this is just a framework that we use. We select according to a habitat type. So obviously, rare habitat types will get a higher score in the risk ranking and priority. And they must be aligned. I think that's what Dr. Harding, with your management plan and with your budget. I think Dr. Harding highlighted it very well yesterday. And so that we make sure that the management interventions that we have are ecologically sound and sustainable. In South Africa, we've got CARA for agricultural land, and for biodiversity and conservation have NEMBA. So we have to consider both of those in managing various land uses. And then what in our process, what we do, so we start with the legal, because that's obviously, it's non-negotiable because it's a legal requirement, and there's fines and penalties related to non-compliance. So we start with selecting rare and important habitats. Also, can be species that you like to conserve that are vulnerable, etc., etc., and key ecosystems like wetlands, riparian zones that we can give a high score. The second level in our prioritization, we select sensitive habitats. Possibly you can say affected by soil erosion and additional invasion risks. So if we don't protect these key resource areas, it can have an effect on habitat functionality, ecosystem services. Yeah. And then also important in the next level, we select conventional habitats as well in the next level. And then I think Malcolm highlighted this really well. We prioritize. So once we've considered the conservation value, the ecosystem services values, after that, within species, we look at where are the densities, and that's where the monitoring component comes in. Where's the light infestations? We can rehabilitate faster, get value for our money, value for our buck, and then the dense stands, like other speakers have mentioned, or already messed up. We can focus on them unless they are close to areas that are ecologically important, or maybe it's a World Heritage Site and you need to urgent. Then obviously it gets pushed up the hierarchy, and then will be prioritized, even though it is dense. And then also consider logistics like terrain, access, distance from water, etc., etc. This is just an example, more specific for AIS and within South Africa. So on the left, we've categorized the various alien species. This is the first level in our prioritization, the legal compliance. And we've got various categories within NEMBA and CARA. So we list both categorization. On the right, these are, they're still alien, but they're not listed. And they do, some of them have invasive properties, but not as extreme as the ones on the left. And then the bottom ones, those are some of the indigenous invaders. So we classify according to that, and then also according to growth forms. Um, and then you can either use your vegetation communities, or I've just used an example here where we looked at land cover and using land cover, and we to demarcate areas of conservation importance, or whatever the case may be. And then we also look at the functional value and the ecosystem services value, for example, wetlands, flood attenuation, catching sediment, passive water treatment, all of those things. And then this helps us, and especially if you're doing large areas, you can use remote sensing to extrapolate between sites. Yeah, so what we then do, we categorize. This is example of prioritization within a wetland area. So for us, this was the priority area. And you can see within the priority area, we then classify according to density. We also look at, I've just used density as this example. We look at the diversity of how many different alien species, which obviously then refers to the complexity of the situation, because each of them have their own registered herbicide, um, as an example. So we, within the priority one, we'll start with the blue areas, which are your lightest density areas. And then once we finish with the blue, we'll move on to the green, and then onto the yellow, and then onto the orange. Once we're done with the priority one, we'll move on to the priority two, three, four, etc. So you can have, and it's got a time frame associated with that. So you work out your man days, how long, and it goes back to Dr. Harding's your management plan. That it must have the timelines, the budget, and all of that available. So that's how we carry. And now, what Dr. Harding also mentioned, even within a species, we've got, and nothing, Malcolm also mentioned that various height classes have got different management requirements. So we separated even further within species. You now know which areas, and it also gives you an indication of is the invasion new? So trying to find out what the root causes are and not just addressing the symptoms, or is it old, tall, mature? You're greater than 10 height classes, so then you know there's no new invasion. But again, within each height class, we can prioritize according to density. So we'll start with the blue areas, etc., as I explained. So in this case, the 0 to 1 meter height class, those are your new invasions, and possibly you can use a foliar application. But like Dr. Harding said correctly, it's site specific and species specific. So we'll address it according to that in our management plan. Then the 1 to 2, that those might be, as an example, brush cutter with the cut stump application with a registered and approved herbicide. And then, for example, on your biological control, if you want to know, uh, and it's seed bearing, then it obviously doesn't help you focusing on the 0 to 1 meter height class. You release it in the areas where you've got a lot of seed. They can establish quickly and they can multiply and spread. And yeah, so this is just the example for Acacia mensae. So a lot of people say, um, but you don't get rid of the seed bank, and unless you get rid of the seed bank, if there's any disturbances that are at the wrong time or whatever it might be. And now there are ways to actually stimulate the seed bank, and then once they grow up, you can follow that up with either a foliar application or with the cultural control methods, which can be browsing by goats, just watching out for bloating, but you can provide licks and clean water and make sure that the crude protein content is not too high. And then for the for the greater than two, but greater than one, but less than 2 meter height, apply a brush cutter and then apply a cut stump treatment there. And then what we can also do if biodiversity is a concern, and as Malcolm highlighted, we must have a thinning. You don't have to get rid of every single Dicrostachys tree. You can leave some within various height classes, and because you want to establish that structure that Malcolm spoke about. And then also releasing the seed weevil, and I forgot the other one, the biological control lady spoke about that, to put date on the seed. And then also a critical point is when you do a cut stump, you don't have to cover the entire area. You just have to the outer edge, and I'm glad to see Malcolm's one, the pictures he posted, that was done correctly. A lot of people paint the whole cut stump surface, but that's not required. It's mainly the sapwood and the cambium layers, and that's where your xylem and phloem tissues transporting to the roots and to the leaves are located. And then you're also putting a whole lot less herbicide into the environment. Okay, so that's just basically, and then I think the part where we often clear, if let's say we clear a dense area, because it's close to an area of ecological or conservation importance. Now we've got bare soil, and we're creating conditions where alien invasive species can flourish. So to prevent reinfestation in those dense areas, because now you've got little to no vegetation cover, to try and prevent soil erosion, uncontrolled runoff of water, to look at a lot of people use these words like they're the same. Restoration and rehabilitation are two totally different things. So rehabilitation has got a uh, key component to AIS management and bush encroachment areas, but it doesn't address the biodiversity values, and especially for wildlife areas, restoration is a better option. At the bottom, I've just included some examples of, unfortunately, these native species, most of the times, they're not commercially available, like your pasture species, which are used for rehabilitation. So you have to harvest, you have to break the dormancy. We've got specific planters for restoration, ecological restoration. And we find out using a gel works better than just broadcasting the seed, because otherwise you have your small seeds in the beginning, then medium, and then your large ones at the end. As an example, we want an even distribution of small, medium, and large seeds over time. And at the bottom, I've just included some of the rehabilitation measures. So the focus here is to try and establish a basal cover. I think Malcolm spoke about that, to make sure that you have rooted material. And in some cases, I think it might not be rehab versus restoration. You can use a combination. So you can use TEF, for example, to as a nurse crop to establish rapid growing vegetation, and making sure you've got less erosion while your native species then later on in its succession kick in. And I think the key there is that, and it's also not a walk-away solution. Unfortunately, there's no such. It needs follow-up, maintenance, and control. I think that's it, Johan, in a nutshell from my side.
Thank you, Gustav. I think you integrated everything very nicely there that we spoke about through the last 2 days. There's a comment that I'm looking for from Anelia, which is really thought-provoking. Are we not looking at weeds wrongly? Shouldn't we ask why the particular weed can flourish? Because so many of them are pioneer plants that grow where the soil conditions are perfect for them. Think deep-rooted rosette-forming plantago that breaks up compaction. Is the problem the plantago in your vineyard, or is the problem that your soils are compacted? Shouldn't you rather find out why the soil is compacted and address that? Your weeds are sending you a message. I am not talking about alien invaders. That is another kettle of fish. I think those are really, really wise words and should be considered, that your weeds are sending you a message.
And I think Gustav also touched on it. There's a symptom and a cause. For sustainable long term, you gotta get down to the root cause, and and it can date back long. And it's usually not just one driver; it's a combination of drivers. But they did mention that there are certain stuff you can look at: overgrazing, compaction, your stocking rates, that kind of stuff. Yes. In terms of our structures, we classify our alien plants. So category 1, 2, and 3. These have been studied. Category 1 pose a great risk to the environment. They're toxic to man, they're toxic to your animals, they suck up groundwater, and those should be cleared without, definitely. We've also learned over time, if I look at South African national parks, they used to treat, I can't remember, blackjack, khaki boss, Bidden's species, and soon realized that it was a pioneer. It was in the system for 1 or 2 years, and then it recovers. So yes, you got to understand the enemy, I think, before you go hands in. These species that I've seen occur here in Uganda are quite hardy and quite hardcore. They usually indicate almost like a tipping point type of scenario. But no, that is solid. Don't treat what you don't need to treat type of thing. Understand the enemy, prioritize. If you have to treat every single plant that's become naturalized or a potential problem, no, there's just too many. Prioritize which ones are important. Maybe for this year, next year, that one's important. Maybe 2, 3 years time. Monitor it. We got every year in South Africa, we see, not every year, but we go through stages where we've seen like Sesbania pop up everywhere. And after 2 or 3 years, it's gone. So yes, pioneers are playing an important role. But some of these are quite hardy, they require intervention.
Yeah. Thanks, Malcolm. I've got a question for Lorraine. Lorraine, you mentioned that your country neighbors should also be considered, and collaboration should be necessary and should be in place. And we actually invited quite a few of the conservation agencies from neighboring countries to the workshop. And the Kenyans showed up in force yesterday. I was really glad to see that. Lorraine, are there mechanisms in place, regional bodies to control invasive plants?
I think at the moment there is a move to sort of collaborate more within the SADC region. I don't know so much about in the East African area as a cohesive collective.
It seems like an initiative that's really necessary.
Yeah, I mean, there have been sort of specific projects like the Jeff project that addressed breaking invasive barriers to invasive plants, where it was more developing policies for the region. But I don't know if it's sort of continued with regional cooperation. I don't think so, as far as I know, but maybe perhaps someone else knows better.
Yep. Okay, I see Gustav has his hand up.
Yeah, so it's more comment than a question. It's, for me, the delay option until you have all information and know everything. It's like kind of like the elephant situation. We kind of waited way too long, and now for any money, it kind of gets out of control. Sometimes, unfortunately, yes, it's good to have all the scientific information, understand every single interaction, but sometimes you have to make a calculated risk-based approach. And I agree with Dr. Hart. In some cases, it's better to do nothing at all if you don't have long-term budget. But if you wait too long, especially with the AIS, the indigenous invaders might be a little bit easier. But I think there's a risk these things grow exponentially. And once they, I think Malcolm alluded to it, the seed bank, if you allow them to develop a large seed bank, they wait for the optimal niche conditions and then they just explode. Any disturbance that's out of time or frequent. But anyway, I just wanted to add that yes, sometimes you do want as much information and you do want to base your management decisions on complete scientific information, 100% supported. But sometimes you don't have all the information, and that's where the principle of adaptive management becomes critical. I just wanted to add that to.
Thanks, Gustav. All right, yeah, I see Julie is commenting that there is a critical gap in regional coordination across the region because the invasive plants, unfortunately, don't respect borders. I think with that, we are going to wrap up. I would really like once again to thank the Uganda Wildlife Authority for this opportunity to use their problem as a case study for the rest of us to learn as well. And then we will also be committed to be available to go further on this journey with them and bring in additional expertise where it is necessary. And then also, this is the start, hopefully, of a network, and that this will proceed, and that the experts who are now have been introduced to the team at the Uganda Wildlife Authority will be hopefully taking this forward into the future. I think a key takeaway for me is that the silver bullet is to realize that there are no silver bullets. That you are in it for the long haul, and that you have to plan to have your resources and your capacity building lined up to be in it for eternity, but basically. It's never over. And that careful planning is needed before you can take action. And I hope that we've brought some of the expertise on board that can help you along in this process. Thank you to all of you who have been involved, also the audience who asked really good questions. We look forward to take this further in the future.